Folks on Zoom, can you hear me okay? All right. Andy, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yep. I was muted. Sorry.
No problem.
That's perfect.
All right, everyone, let's get started. It's 10 past. Welcome to the, what month is it? September meeting of the Bighorn Watershed Committee. Thanks everybody for coming, in person and online. And we keep this mic going so that folks on the Zoom machine can hear us better. I attended one meeting virtually where they didn't have a microphone and the speakers in the room started walking. That person is disqualified automatically. That would be the definition of in this feedback situation. Okay. Well, there's the first for everything. Anyway. Are we just on the list of getting bombed here? Okay. Well, let's start either way. Let's start as we normally do with introductions. I'll pass this thing around. Pedro Marquez, I'm the Executive Director of the Bighorn Watershed Committee.
Jim Hagenbarth, a rancher from Glen.
Paul and Sandy Clary, residents of Glen.
Tom Riggs, just
Jim Linehy, Butte Silver Bowl Water Utility.
Joel Clary, Maker of Divine.
Jared Payne, FWP.
Roy Morris, Church Grant Q.
Anna Magadori, FWP.
Howard Varner, lived down on Minor Creek by Jackson. Dean Peterson, rancher of Bighorn.
Randy Smith, rancher of Glen. Ben Laporte, Programs Manager for the Bighorn Watershed Committee.
I'm Tana Alpha, the Associate Director for the Bighorn Watershed Committee.
Okay, we'll start as we always do with a precip update, and Matt Norberg, he's chiming in from the Zoom, and we'll get him up. If I have to amplify his voice, I'll do that.
Tana, can you give me screen sharing? Oh, here we go. Okay. Sorry I couldn't make it in person tonight. We've been having a little bit of some crud running around our house, and I didn't feel like you guys probably wanted me to bring that in to the meeting. Anyways, I'm Matt Norberg. I'm with Montana DNRC Hydrologist. All right, well, I'll move through this. Hopefully we don't have any more interruptions. So I think you guys are all kind of aware of, what's still going on. Not a lot's changed since the last meeting, but we're still well below average with all of our stream flows. Just a couple notes: the Mud Creek, Maiden Rock Glen, and then the Bighorn near Twin Bridges are currently reporting minimum stream flows for this date of, based on their period of record. The upper Bighorn sites, associated with the CCA, they're all below our minimum target flows. The Wisdom and the Melrose gauge are close to the minimum flows. Coincidentally, they both occurred in 1988, and the Wisdom gauge was obviously 0, it was dry, and the Melrose was reporting a minimum of 100 CFS. And then right now we've got about 140 CFS, the Melrose gauge. I'm sure you guys all know fishing closures are still in effect for sections 1, 2, 4, and 5, with section 3 just recently updated to conservation status due to low flows, or flows dropping below that 200 mark. So again, you guys can all find this stuff online. I just like to put these numbers up So you can see the discharge values for the USGS gauges along the river. And then here's also the DNRC gauges that we operate within the sections of the CCAA. Precip, year-to-date precip in the Big Hole is currently 78% of average. So based on the 8 sites that they calculate within the basin, the total precip for water year 2021 right now is 23.4 inches for the year. And the average for this time of year for September 15th is 30 inches, so we're well below. Precip is currently tracking with those minimum values recorded in 1994. 1988 was the second lowest year recorded with 24.4 inches. And then if you kind of go back towards the beginning of the summer, late spring, I guess, June 1st, we had 20.2 inches. That's, you know, kind of on average across the basin. And we've only received 3 inches of moisture since that time. So, I mean, I think you guys all know how dry it's been, but that just is kind of reflective in those numbers. And then again, I like to show this with precip and snowpack in the different meetings. And you can just see, I mean, it's just obvious what's been going on, you know, since about June 1st, it's just been flatline and there's just really been no precip to speak of. And we're flirting with that minimum territory right now. And it's hopefully, I'll talk a little bit about this coming up, but hopefully we can gain a little bit of moisture in the next couple of days to at least get us off this minimum mark here. So temperatures, actually, you know, temperatures over the last month, we've kind of had a little bit of a brief respite from the heat. The 30-day departure from normal reflected kind of average temperatures for the Big Hole. However, as you guys know, in the last week or so, we've jumped right back up to that warm spell, and we've been well above average temperatures for the Big Hole in Montana in general. And you can see on this red is just indicative of, you know, how hot it is compared to the normal temperatures. So again, we're still in D4 for our drought status. We have an exceptional drought, and I showed this chart last month too. And things that are interesting is that eastern part of the state, I know this is not Big Hole, but just in general, that's increasing as well. And then you can see the southwest corner where the Big Hole is, we're still in that D4 category. So here's a little bit of hope, maybe some positivity. So the 7-day forecast, we're looking at, you know, maybe some cooler temperatures and hopefully some much needed precip. Looks like starting on maybe Saturday evening, going through Sunday and into Monday, we're predicted to have some not significant amounts, but at least some good percentages of rain throughout the valley, and then the possibility of snow. I think Sunday evening, Monday morning is probably when that snow might hit in the upper valley. And then just moving forward, so we're now into a La Nina watch, and we're transitioning from that ENSO neutral to the La Nina, and we got a pretty good chance. They're predicting 70 to 80% chance of transitioning to that La Nina for the winter from, you know, in the next 3 months. So, and here's just kind of a chart that starts. So this is August, September, October, November. So you can just see that the blue bars are the percentage of transitioning into that La Nina. So we have a pretty good shot at that. And typically I put in, you know, like a 3-month forecast with the charts. And I didn't this time just because they haven't updated. They're going to be updating, I think, tomorrow. And so it would have been from the same chart basically that I had at last meeting. But and as we transition, it's a little bit weird because they have a hard time kind of predicting this. It just depends on how fast that transition happens, and there's some other factors that go into play. So I didn't necessarily put these charts up just because I didn't want to provide you with any false information. So, but I think moving forward, you can probably expect, at least for the next month or so, probably a little bit warmer than average and less precip than average. But, as we move forward, hopefully that'll be transitioning into at least more normal conditions. That is all I have. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, maybe that was listened to by other folks. Sorry about that on the Zoom, folks. So, the other big thing that happened, on the upside, this photo here, taken from a couple weeks ago down at Twin Bridges at the fire hall, where we met with a couple ranchers, met with the county commissioner was there, Great West Engineering, who were the engineers down there. And, we had some ideas on how to approach the issue at Pennington Bridge and the impending, disaster there for that bridge and infrastructure. And before we took any of the designs any further, what we wanted to do is get input from folks that live there and are going to be impacted the most by anything we do. And it was just a great, coming together of minds, and we had maps laid out, and these guys that have lived down there for a long time and know the place better than anybody they were helping point out places where we could create side channels that could get activated and lit up that would turn into great fisheries, like rearing habitat, and would also serve to diminish some of the velocities and flows coming at the Pennington Bridge. We had a geomorphologist, Karen Boyd, explain what she's seeing down there. And the trajectory down there, if you know the Pennington, there's two bridges. When they were put in perfectly aligned to where the river was going under them. And now that alignment is completely off to the point where the river is basically going to end up making like a hard 90 left turn to go under the bridge. And that's not a good situation for a river of that size. That's the trends, that's the way it's heading. So we need to figure out a solution before it gets that way. Waiting for a disaster and FEMA to kind of swoop in and fix things is not really a solution, right? So we're trying to go upriver as far up as we can take some of that velocity and some of that flow out of that S-shaped turn and stabilize some of the stream banks. So that's going really well. And, you know, meetings like this are, I think, really the heart of our work and what we need to keep doing more of and keep our eyes focused on this kind of thing. So just thought I'd relay that. As far as getting the message out about collaborative conservation, MTPR is kind of 90–95% committed now to doing a piece about the work that we're doing, kind of just across the board, the drought work that we're doing, just the collaboration and the space that this organization creates for folks to come together. And they'll probably pick up other watershed groups that are at very early phases of their work. And that'll be part of their shared state podcast. It's an ongoing segment that they have. So that's pretty exciting. That'll get, you know, out there to a lot of folks. And then the Stories for Action video, I happened to be taking the filmmaker down to do an interview with me, and came across this moose right at Salmon Fly. If you see, she's down in the bottom corner. So we got some great footage for that video segment. It'll be about 8 to 10 minutes, and they're still working on it. But that also will be a pretty big deal. They chose, like I said, the last couple of weeks, they were looking at across Montana, what's going really well? What are some of the inspiring stories out there of groups at the grassroots level kind of doing work that should be emulated and replicated in other places? And so the Big Hole is one of the places that they chose specifically, this organization and our work. They're also in the Mussel Shell, on the Blackfeet Reservation, and in the Sealy Swan for these 4 like 8 to 10 minute videos that'll come out. So excited about that. You know, word's getting out. As far as some project work stuff that Ben is not going to cover, we've been out doing, we're kind of at the phase with the Anaconda Uplands piece where we're getting into like compliance, like EPA Superfund compliance phases. So we're walking the areas today, and I mean, everything's lining up for us to basically have the EPA's eyes and ears, people signing off on our work, saying everything you constructed is operational and functional. And then that triggers a kind of a 2-year window of doing some reports and filling out some forms about, is there erosion, is there vegetation, whatnot. And then after a little bit, EPA checks it off and that whole Superfund site is good to go. None of that stops what Vanna is going to continue doing up there as far as management and restoration. So there's still a pot of money that she's going to be managing for the long haul that hopefully we'll be involved with as well. But that's pretty exciting and a little bittersweet. It's been kind of a decade that I've been working up there, and it's kind of coming to an end. I can't point to any spot where I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to bring some big machinery up here and do all this big work. It's like we kind of already did it. So that'll be going on for the next couple of days as far as being in the field, and then plenty of work this winter for Ben and I, keeping that up. The rest of it, I won't get into the weeds. It's permitting and contracting and budgeting for all these projects, and everywhere I'm turning, some federal agency is as slow as molasses getting back to me, and we're just trying to do what we can to get through, you know, Army Corps permitting, but I won't bore you with that stuff. And then lastly, you know, I had a good talk with at least one of the irrigators on that down below Melrose about that double ditch that it's the wood and pendergrass ditch where they share the water, but there's two diversions right there, and we already have designs for this to make it one and try to make it more efficient, try to make it less of a danger on the river and decrease their maintenance on it. There's a lot of that type of work that we can go after, and I'm looking into NRCS funds to go after irrigation projects. So if you hear of folks that have needs with their irrigation infrastructure and we can find some conservation benefits by doing a switch or a fix to something that they're struggling with as far as irrigation goes, send them my way. My goal here is not to spend 2 years on one project to get it funded. It's to spend some time getting a raft of irrigation projects together, put one application into the NRCS, to get boatload of money and that's guaranteed for the next like 7 years. So then we can just start knocking out these projects one by one. It's a lot of effort to bring in one project. You might as well put in the effort for a grant that kind of gives you more of a long-term horizon. So that's what I'm shooting for. And I can get there a lot faster if folks come to me saying, hey, I could really use a new head gate. I could really do X, Y, and Z on my place. And, you know, I'm open to ideas, you know, anyone here that works with folks or has their own needs, you know, just let me know. And I think that'll do it. I'm going to cut myself off here so we can get to the main event. So we'll move to steering committee update. You guys got anything? I got nothing. We'll meet we'll meet towards the end of this month again for our quarter check-in. Okay, and then so we'll move on then to Tana, you can do wildlife. I'll pull you up here. Oops. Okay. Turn it down. Oh.
All right, so I just wanted to give a quick update on our Range Rider program. The Range Rider program was July 1st through September 30th. So we're nearing the end for the season. The Big Hole Watershed Committee employs a Range Rider who monitors Westport service grazing allotments in the Upper Big Hole each summer, and he is looking for predator activity and also checking on cattle with the goal of both, ideally preventing livestock loss to depredation by wolves and bears, but also helping to find the carcasses quickly so they can get confirmed by wildlife services and the producers can get reimbursed for their losses. So that is the purpose of this program. This is I believe the 11th year that Chet has been doing this for the Big Hole. Funding this year came from the NRCS and potentially from the Livestock Loss Board, although I'm still waiting for them to announce that. So this year has been pretty different for Chet with everything going on. He actually had the opportunity to help to find and help put out a wildfire. So this little fire was a lightning strike. Chet just kind of stumbled upon it in August as he was doing his monitoring. And he carries a chainsaw with him and a fire extinguisher, although I don't think he used the fire extinguisher. But anyway, he used his tools and just kind of contained it and called for help and called the Forest Service and the ranchers, and people came out and get the fire out. So obviously it wasn't a very big one, but it got bigger if it wasn't for Chet. So that's definitely not a goal of our Range Rider program, but an unintended secondary benefit this year, because we definitely don't need any more fires. All right, so we've seen quite a bit of wolf activity this year. There have been no confirmed depredations on enrolled allotments by wolves, but we've seen quite a few photos of them. Chet's tracked quite a few of them, and he's been keeping his eye on 2 different wolf dens, just to kind of have an idea of where they are and what they're up to. And Chet has also kind of served as the eyes and ears on the allotments this summer and has helped to let ranchers know about open gates, livestock that have, sometimes are on the wrong side of the gate, presence of wolves. And I didn't put it on here, but he helped locate a missing bull the other day. So that was probably much appreciated.
Nice.
And then the big thing this year is grizzly bears. So we've been seeing, we haven't been seeing, but Chet has been seeing signs of grizzly bears in the Big Hole over by Jackson in the Little Lake Creek area. And there have been quite a few grizzly bears reported in other areas in the watershed too. But this one we actually were able to get photographs of and to get photographs of the tracks. And Chet took a hair sample and to submit to FWP for testing. I'm not sure if he does. I'm not sure if he does the testing. We don't. We send it in. Okay. So he thought it might have been from a horse, but he gathered it anyway. So we'll see. And yeah, I'll read that to you because it's kind of hard to see. But this is from Chet's report. He said the tracks were huge, measuring 5+ inches wide on the front pad, and the rear track measuring 9 inches from the front of the toes to the rear of the pad. The front feet vexed me for some time, for a rear that a track had been laid and another placed on top of it, but offset 3 inches to the rear from the first. As I walked along following these tracks on the road, it finally dawned on my rather simple mind that what I had first interpreted as a set of toes out front from those in the readable track was, in fact, claws. I've never seen a confirmed grizzly track with my own eyes. However, I knew with a 99% chance of certainty that these were the tracks from a member of that infamous family. So Chet, if any of you know Chet, he is really excited about this. So, and he's been reminded to, bring his air spray, and he's very careful, but he's very excited. And so here you can see the tracks. And excuse me. And so yesterday, Chet was tracking what he thought were 2 grizzly bears in the same area. And there were also 2 grizzly bears spotted in the Eastern Pioneers, although I'm not sure if that was a confirmed sighting or not. And there have been many more unconfirmed reports of grizzlies in the watershed. We knew they were here, we knew they were moving in, but it seems like they're really coming now. So what does this mean? Basically just means we need to be bear aware. We need to work, or whether we're working or recreating, we need to carry bear spray, make noise, travel in groups if we can, and be especially careful if you're bow hunting, because sneaking around, bow hunters are usually trying to be very quiet, and I think that can be one of the main, or that can be a very dangerous activity when there's grizzly bears around, I should say. So we try to secure bear attractants like livestock feed and trash. This could potentially help to secure grizzly specific funding sources in the future, because we haven't been able to really make the case that we have grizzlies in the big hole. But we definitely have. We're starting to build our body of evidence a little bit more each year, so we can really make the case that they're here, which locals will tell you that they've always been here. And so you can contact BHWC if you need a bear-resistant trash can, or if you want to borrow scare devices, bear spray, practice bear spray, books about grizzlies or wolves or conflict prevention, or temporary electric fencing. We have all kinds of tools like that are just sitting in my garage. So if anybody wants to try them out or borrow them or use them for the season, just let me know. And that's the grizzly there.
I just have a little question.
Yeah.
Electric fence.
If it's high voltage enough, we can run it. So.
I think there's been very good results on that. Like for the most part, I think it's a good experiment. But I've also seen video where it just really angered the bear and came back and dimensions.
Right. So it's
depends on the bear.
potentially better than nothing, but probably not foolproof. That's why they say bear resistant instead of bear proof.
Any questions or follow-up for Tanner? Nope. Updates, Dean or Jim, you guys got anything? I don't. Nope. Awesome. Yeah, we'll keep chugging along. Ben with restoration.
Oh, yeah. I got you. Well.
Cool. All right. So this last month, we finalized our quality assurance project plan for Elkhorn Mine and Mill. I mentioned this last week, this giant document that we've been working on to get to basically put in place everything we plan to do this year with soils characterization. Finalize that document, and Unfortunately, the grant program and the agency who we're working with to actually fund the soils work, they're so backlogged on contracting through the Bureau of Reclamation. And I've been super patient and been very optimistic that the timing is going to work out for us to pull off this giant project this year before the snow flies. But with each and every day passing, I'm kind of losing hope a little bit. So most likely that whole soils characterization project is going to get pushed till next spring. There's still a little bit of hope, but again, I'm not holding my breath. Good news is we have a plan B for project work up there this year. We're going to keep the ball rolling, essentially do a more simplistic soils characterization that will help inform our greater, larger project. So we're going to still go out there and collect some soil samples and get some more water samples, but we're not going to do the full-blown soils work, which I was super excited about, but it'll happen. It just might not happen this fall. Yeah, so another really exciting thing that happened this month at the Elkhorn was we partnered with Montana Tech and the Bureau of Mines and Geology. And these folks are going to help us with the Elkhorn. And what they essentially are going to do is send drones into the adit up at Elkhorn. And then with that drone footage, they're going to ideally map all the inner mine workings, like the drifts, the stopes, the shafts, the tunnels. And with that, we can try to hopefully identify where all that water is coming into these inner mine workings. It's going to help us with our overall restoration, reclamation approach here. But this last month, they did their test drone flight, and this, I'll show you. This is the first drone flight into the adit because it's completely too dangerous for any human to go in there. So this guy's got his drone. He's got these little kind of goggles on his eyes that he's kind of flying this thing around there. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I think it's pretty sweet. So the idea here is, because there's thousands of feet of inner mine workings in here, and he'll lose connection really quickly because he's going to go straight into the hillside. So he's going to fly like 10 of them in there and kind of leapfrog them in there so he can keep his connection. But you can see here, yeah, it's Bigfoot right there. He said it got really foggy and he got nervous and he didn't want to lose the drone. He's kind of planning on losing 1 out of 10.
It does look like that looks like a track, doesn't it?
Go back.
It looks like a footprint. It's crazy. Bigfoot is acid mine drainage tolerant.
Anyway, the technology is crazy. How they're gonna be able to take this footage here and build a 3D model on what's going on in there. So hopefully I'll have a lot more cool drone flights to show you guys. Great partnership though up at Elkhorn. Pedro touched on the Anaconda Uplands, what we're doing with NRD and EPA. I have a Montana Conservation Corps crew. They just started their hitch this week, and we'll be doing a lot of weed spraying and of course a bunch of handwork up there. So I have them for another week and a half. I'll be up there with those guys. This month I was also up in the Eastern Pioneers scouting for conifer encroachment projects and some more PDA low tech work. Quickly realized there's no shortage of conifer encroachment work up in the Eastern Pioneers. So that is more project planning and permitting that I won't bore you guys with, but it's certainly taking a whole lot of time. Again, more time and planning on our lower and upper big hole bank stabilization project that I still have slated for this fall. Timing's looking good on those. We have a Melrose bed planting project. I know I mentioned that last week. And then hopefully an upper Oregon Creek PDA project, but some things need to happen with that one too. So that one might get pushed to the spring depending on how everything lands. And then lastly, finally got contracted for our Upper French Gulch fish barrier project. And working with DNRC, who's a little slower than what we're used to in the big old watershed community, but finally got contracts with them, and we're going to be working on that project a little bit this fall, and then it will keep us busy this winter too. So lots to look forward to on that one. Yeah. All right.
Questions? Ben, seems like at one time you mentioned that there's going to be some work done on some kind of bugs, or not bugs, something that would clean up that water in the Elkhorn Mine or Nevis or
Mushrooms.
something.
Yeah, Pedro can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's one of those far out ideas, but there's plenty of lab tests that have been done that has shown that mycelium mushroom, basically mycelium growing on a medium, can actually the difference in the ionic charge between the positive metals and the negative mycelium, it'll actually just attract the metal, and it will stabilize the metals onto the solid mycelium, like growth medium. So we put in an application for a planning project to demonstrate this concept in the lab and then take it to the field and actually take some of this Elkhorn water and run it through a system of pipes that are filled with mycelium eating some simple carbon-based, spent straw or spent barley grain or something like that, something cheap and easy. And the idea is, measure the water in, measure the water out, and see how much of the metals stayed in the solid filter. It's basically a bioabsorbent filtration system. And so this is like step one. It's amazing to me when you read the literature, there's plenty of published papers showing that this works at the lab bench level. And you can't find a project where they actually found an active adit and actually tested it in the field. So I figured we might as well start. Let's see. I think it was a good proposal. We'll hear back in a few months, but if this goes through, it has a lot of potential to prove it up. It'd be fantastic, and there would be applicability everywhere if you can figure it out. And so it's cool. It's a combination of real geeky science and logistics, of kind of designing a system that you'd have replaceable. Let's say it works, you'd have to have replaceable filter parts. So you'd go in and just unclick a section of the filter and put a new one in and keep it going. But it's, as you can see, that water is cranking out of there 24/7, 365 days a year. So the solution has to be 24/7, 365 also. Unless some miraculous way we find where the groundwater is seeping into the adit and figure out a way to shut that off. Yeah, well. Potentially, but it's a big mountain. I mean, you're just on a huge mountainside. And there's some companies that Ben's looked into, and we've gotten quotes from other companies that do electromagnetics to find the fissures in the rock that would be where the water would go. But some of this, it's so expensive. So we're kind of trying to poke at this at every angle we can, but it's a long, slow process, All right. Any other questions? Okay. So any new business or things that weren't on the agenda that anybody wants to bring up?
Yeah, minimum streamflow legislation.
Okay, you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, why don't you guys support it?
Well, give some more details, please. And who's speaking?
I don't know. I don't need to. It would be Joe Gutkowski's proposal that's been on the board for decades, and we all know why the big hole is dewatered. It's because of the ag industry, and you guys are putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone when we all know that the reason the big hole, the Jefferson, and the Beaverhead is, well, it's basically dying, is because of the severe dewatering. And, you know, it's kind of time to maybe tackle the ag industry.
And so our drought plan is
your drought plan is voluntary. It doesn't work.
So you're proposing
minimum stream flow legislation.
All right, well, you know, when that draft bill gets, does anyone have a comment to that? I'm saying if there's, you know, something like that would require a whole lot of.
Yeah, it would require, it would require energizing the general public to understand the current situation as far as the severe dewatering of all of our main stem rivers in this state. And as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of you guys' job. I mean, everyone knows that the number one solution to pollution is dilution. And if there is no water to dilute said pollution, we're going to have the problems that we're having right now, which is the die-off of all of our main stem rivers. Sorry for joining your party here.
No, that's not. This is. I mean, bringing ideas to the table is what we're all about. I think concrete proposals.
I mean, you guys are in your echo chamber. The whole, all of us know. We drive around these valleys. We see the alfalfa fields and the diversion ditches full, and the third and fourth hayings going on. When we have dead fish and plummeting brown trout numbers and every other thing, like, you know, the general public knows, well, not the general public, but a lot of us kind of know what's going on, and it's the ag industry. So, you know, while I appreciate what you guys are doing, you're not tackling the root of the problem.
So the root solution then would be ag not
more
using
water. More water.
Well, it's what you're proposing is ag not using water rights.
No, I'm not proposing ag using no water. Joe Gutkowski's legislation clearly says that the ag industry can take, you know, 70, 80% of the water. But when you got 3 CFS flowing in the upper Big Hole, and Fish and Game is dumping 15,000, you know, grayling into the Wise River to hide the fact that the grayling have pretty much been extirpated from their southernmost native range. You know, I don't know what to say. No, it's not taking. It's not saying ag. This isn't. This is not an either or thing.
If I told you that some ranchers are down to 20% of their water rights this year. Yeah, you're saying propose that they go to.
You're telling me to not believe my lying eyes. Okay, I see the ag ditches completely full, and I see all the, you know, you can give me an anecdotal story about how one rancher did something, but that's not the overall watershed. Okay, we got 1,200 CFS flowing out of the Big Hole, down the Ruby, and down the Beaverhead, right? And there's 15 CFS, 30 CFS, 50 CFS in the Jefferson. That's a 98% dewatering. Numbers don't lie. And we can all read the USGS real-time flow charts and see exactly what's going on.
So, Pedro, I'm sorry, but I don't.
But what? That's the truth.
We're gonna have a civil discussion of ideas here. So why don't you give the next speaker?
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to hear why the Jefferson's 98% dewatered and how this voluntary drought program is working so well.
I am just curious as to who Fisheye Guy is and who's speaking.
I don't know. Does anybody want to answer that? I'm just a guy. I saw your thing. I thought I'd join up.
Yeah,
sure. That's what so tell us who you are. Everybody introduce themselves. So who are you?
I don't know. I'm just a guy that lives in Montana, you know?
Well,
Okay.
you don't know much about Montana if you think that the big hole drainage has 3 to 4 cuttings of hay a year. So,
well, whatever it is, those ditches are completely full.
okay.
And 3 CFS is 3 CFS. I mean, you guys are kind of the laughing stock. I mean, George Ochetsky wrote an editorial for the Missoulian and was like, yeah, the USGS gauges, the top 3 USGS gauges on the big hole have not registered for weeks, if not months.
Okay.
You got the Lower Ruby closed the first week of June for fishing, if I remember correctly.
And so a historic drought happens every once in a while. And this is historic drought levels. There's simply no more water coming in to the drainage for lack of precip.
Oh, come on. I went to the Wise River.
I drove. And that's 1988 with similar flow conditions, the river at Wisdom went dry for 32 days. 3 CFS isn't great, but it's a whole lot better than dry for 32 days under similar drought conditions. So, and that's science-based, and that's based on a lot of work to get measurement devices in and get ranchers doing voluntary conservation and calling each other. And that's really where the spirit of where we need to go needs to be. Bringing
maybe the collaborative
solutions.
Maybe your collaborative conservation model is actually a huge failure. I went up the Wise River. Okay, the Wise River is
Hey, so we got to move on to other things, but collaborative conservation works when people provide their names and show up, right? So, you know, bring something and show up. We're willing to talk, and you might learn something from the.
You don't think I show up?
Well, what's your name?
I don't know. You got the Google machine. Why don't you Google fisheye guy?
Okay, well, we can do that.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
All right, we got another question.
Pedro, this is Jim Hagenbar. Mark Dragon called me this morning.
Yeah.
John from Frontier Anglers going to sponsor an initiative
to mandate in-stream flows on Montana rivers. And so we discussed it, and he decides he wants to do that. That's his prerogative.
You discussed it with him?
As much as you could. He likes to talk.
Yeah.
I didn't have much chance to say much, but anyway, I thought people should be aware of that. And what's happening right now is exactly what happened in 88 and 95, and that's why this group was put together. I asked Sean to, it's very important to plan down the road for drought. And part of that planning has to do with how do we get more water in the watershed. One is address yield of the watershed by vegetative manipulation. Another one is to possibly go with cloud seeding. Another one is off-stream storage. Another one is groundwater recharge and groundwater storage. There's a lot we can do, and that's where we should be putting our efforts. For those of us that have the water rights, we could fully participate in that and make a huge difference when we run into a drought. A year like this is when those little creeks and springs quit flowing, the river quits flowing. And every bit of water in that river comes from a flake of snow and a drop of rain. And so it behooves us to manage those drops of rain and flakes of snow from the time they hit the water shed until they pass on to. And that's what we should do. If we want to make a difference, that's how you're going to do
it. Anything else? Anybody else?
Yeah, can I add something?
Oh, we've got some speakers that drove here a long way to give us a talk on wildlife
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, we can talk about this huge drought, but I went up the Wise River and there was, I don't know, maybe 50, 60, 70 CFS flowing. The thing about the big hole drainage, and I'm sure you guys know this, is that there's a ton of spring recharge. There's steady water. We're completely protected against drought if the natural hydrology of the region is allowed to work. That Wise River had, I don't know, 50, 60 CFS up top, and there was, I don't know, 3 CFS flowing into the that middle part of the big hole. And we all know that that is the key cold water tributary to that section. So yeah, even a tributary like
we're working with folks throughout that drainage to come up with a plan that works for everybody that manages resources.
Well, there's only one way to do that, and that would be maintaining minimum stream flow.
Yeah, no, we hear you, and we'll look out that proposal.
There's plenty of spring water throughout the whole big hole.
It sounds like you've got all the ideas.
Pat, that's your name, right? Pat Clayton?
Yeah.
Why don't you come to our next meeting in Divide, and we'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
But you have to also think about the fact that it's not a single user group. This isn't a battle of user groups over water.
So 30%. So Joe Gawkowski's minimum stream flow legislation.
Yeah, we're going to move on. We're going to take a break here, and we'll come back and reconvene in about 5-10 minutes because we've got some speakers here that have a lot.
Why are you censoring me?
It's not censorship; it's time.
Yeah, it is.
So we'll take a break here.
So 30%. 30% is too much to ask for.
Can you mute?
30% is too much to ask for, huh?
Our FWP team here. So Jesse, you're going to kick it off? Okay, Jesse Newby's going to kick it off. And then Vanna, I just want to give Vanna a special shout today. She woke up in the Bob Marshall today and made it here for our meeting. So I really appreciate it.
Jesse had an epic drive.
We can compare epic drives, but you know, it's what it takes to do this work. You got to show up, right?
So I haven't met you all. I might need a tutorial here.
Oh yeah. I would use the computer for switching the slides, but there is a pointer. There is a laser, that middle red button.
I'll make use of that.
Yeah.
Sit here. I don't think I met you all. So I'm Jesse Newby. I'm the new area biologist out of Dillon. I took Craig Fager's job about 1.5 years ago. But what I'm going to talk about right now is Ben and I will be tag teaming this. We kind of put our presentations together, and I'll just start things off with an update about Are we sure? What if I do this? What's going on? No, I'm not progressing. I broke it.
Did you break it? Hold on. Let me, I wonder if, might be that.
No, there, thanks. So I was going to give you an update on the moose study. I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with it already, but back in 2013, FWP started a statewide moose project due to concerns about population declines in other states and some concerns that we were having our own. And so this study, some of this is going to be blocked, but so there was a couple of goals of this study. One of them was to come up with a cost-effective monitoring strategy for moose. And I'm not going to get into that just in the interest of time. I'm going to try to fly through some other stuff of the research But if you have any questions, just go ahead and interrupt me, and I'm happy to fill out details. So the other half of the research was to actually just get a better handle on their population ecology in general and what's driving our populations. And so for that, we had to drill down into specific areas and get kind of in-depth data on those animals to get measurements of vital rates. So the things that really drive populations like adult survival, reproduction, calf survival. We could figure out which of those was really moving the population the most, and then what out in the environment might be acting on those vital rates like predation or disease, nutritional stress. So to do this, we had 3 study areas, one up in Northwest Montana in the Cabinet Fissure on the Rocky Mountain front, and then of course in the Big Hole. And to accomplish this, we had to radio color and track their movements. So to date, there's been 193 colored moose. We just color the cows. And that'll actually be the total colored moose. We're not going to color anymore as we're winding down the study. But by coloring those and tracking them through time, we can get that information on those vital rates, like that adult survival. We can see which ones reproduce and monitor their calf as well. But of course, this wouldn't even be possible, especially in the Big Hole more than any other area, without a lot of landowner buy-in and support. So that was really the heart of the study in the Big Hole. And so I'm just going to jump right into talking about some of those vital rates. And again, just if you want me to slow down, just let me know. So the first one I'll talk about is adult female survival. Now, it's probably obvious that adult female survival is important to the population, but we weren't sure exactly how much it would actually move the population around, because with an animal like moose, they tend to live a long time once they reach adulthood and survive. Oh, great. Yeah, patrol. Though we have had a couple of mortalities from vehicle strikes, that's true. Anyway, so those vital rates, that vital rate tends to stay high and stable. So it doesn't necessarily always move the population that much. But then actually, when we got on the ground and started looking at the animals, we discovered that in the Big Hole in particular, we were seeing unusually or unexpectedly high adult female mortality. And so we find these moose that are kind of in this state that you see up there. And that already in the study design, we knew we wanted to get cause-specific mortality to see what they're dying from. But that, when we started seeing that elevated mortality, it became even more important. So I'm just going to show you the results of this so far. So this is some categories of the different causes of death we documented. And I think probably the thing I'd draw your attention to is over half of those were health related. Some kind of health thing, usually tied seemingly to parasites or disease, particularly in the Big Hole. We were seeing with these mortalities high Eleophora rates. And so those are the carotid artery worm. And they get in the carotid artery and can reduce blood flow to the head. And we're not sure if that was the sole cause of that elevated mortality we were seeing, but we were seeing elevated levels in those moose that were dying. And then you can kind of see some of the other causes of death, but in the Big Hole here, it really was just those health-related mortalities. We did have a few harvested vehicle strike, but all the rest were health-related. Yes. Oh, it varied. It was on the Rocky Mountain front. It was also dominant. Interestingly, we also saw not as high as the Big Hole, but also we saw quite a bit of Eleophora over there. In the Cabinet Fisher area, it was, I think, pretty much split in half between predation and health related, maybe with an accident or something in there too. I'll get kind of more into the predation and on the Cabinet Fisher stuff because it was much more dominant. But the interesting thing about that is that our adult female survival in the Cabinet Fisher area, even with that predation, was extremely high. So they would die from that, but you know, it was pretty marginal.
Is that showing that? Sorry, that's showing that there's 70 mortalities out of 193 total in the study. If I add up all those numbers.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Almost a third.
Yeah. There's. Yeah, I don't know if I should get in the weeds too much, but yeah, over 8 years, going on 9. And, you know, when we're capturing all kinds of age ranges too, you know, we're capturing everything from yearlings to, you know, 10, 11-year-old moose. The other thing is that this doesn't present actually like the level of risk for each thing, because to do that, we'd have to parse out like how old is this moose, how many years is it collared. It kind of gives you a rough idea.
So what's the behavior of those? You call them in the geo word?
No, that's a different one. Fortunately, we don't have that yet.
Okay. What's the behavior of the ones that have that parasite?
You know, one of the difficulties of that one is there's not a lot of, without cutting off their head and looking, it's hard to tell how many they have or the extent they might have them. One thing you will see is the cropped ears. So they're not getting enough blood flow into their ears and they're getting frosted off. So you kind of see these short ears, and that's pretty common.
Another sign that we have seen in the big hole models, if it's severe enough, and I know Dean Smith, it'll occlude the blood flow to the eye. Yeah. And so there's not, it's not always equal. The worms could be on one side or the other or both, but it could prevent enough blood flow to the eye that they don't mind. And so it's not a primary cause of death, but it definitely could increase their ability to, or, you know, the likelihood that they'll be predated and or their ability to feed and get enough nutrition, especially if they're blind. Like I know Dean's down on his place. Yeah. So just kind of go in circles. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we see.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to treat with ivermectin?
No, and I mean, practically speaking, I don't know, you know, how you do that to a wild population to make it scale. The other, I guess the good news about this that I should mention is that mortality has lessened over time. Like the first few years, we were getting a lot of it. And now actually their survival rates averaging about what the other areas are. So we might have just seen a rough patch of it. But it is statewide, the levels of Polyphora in moose are higher down here than in most places. So then just to move on to one of these other vital rates, reproduction, and this is kind of busy, so I'll just kind of walk you through it, just starting on the left-hand side here in adult pregnancy. And what you can see there is, as far as adult pregnancy rates, so this is 2.5-year-olds and older, they're pretty comparable between the different study areas, maybe a little bit higher, 85% on the Rocky Mountain front. Where it gets interesting is when you look at yearling pregnancy rates. We've never documented a yearling that was pregnant in the Cabinet Fisher or the Big Hole, but over a third of them on the Rocky Mountain front were pregnant. And similarly, twinning rates, we've got about 27% of the cows, when we go search for them in the spring to see what they have for calves, about 20% of those have have twins. It's considerably smaller in the Cabinet Fisher, and then we've only had one cow, I think, in the big hole that we actually saw with twins. So what this tells you is there's a fair bit of body of literature that shows that those two indicators, yearling pregnancy and twinning rates, is tied closely to their nutritional resources. So where that population is compared to the resources they actually have out there, probably says that Rocky Mountain Front's pretty far from carrying capacity, and so it can grow a lot of moose. Maybe a little bit different here where it might be more hard scrabble. And so all these numbers translate to this observed fecundity. So what these numbers represent are the number of new calves we see per cow that we have collared. And so you can see on the Rocky Mountain Front, we pretty much see a calf for every cow. These numbers are a little deceptive because of this complicating factor right here. So this is a hard thing to explain, but we called it observed parturition, which is a terrible name. But basically what it's saying is this is the proportion of cows that we actually see calves with that we said were pregnant in the wintertime. I should just maybe mention, we get those pregnancy rates by blood samples, or if we're not capturing an animal from pellet samples, we can get progesterone from that. So I guess the take home here is that, you know, pretty much every moose on the Rocky Mountain Front we said was pregnant, we see calves with. But you can see there's a big discrepancy in the Cabinet Fisher area where almost a quarter of them that we say are pregnant, we never see a calf with. And so what we think is happening is we're probably getting a lot of early mortality in those calves, and we're just not getting a chance to see them, you know. In that, let's say, first week they're born, we could just miss it. And that's kind of given a level of credence with the survival we see. So this chart here shows survival through their first year, and just basically you're just watching the mortality through that first year. And the orange is the Cabinet Fisher, and you can see that's considerably lower than the other two, and consistently so. So about, you know, 39% of those calves actually reach their adult or their first year. On the Rocky Mountain Front, in contrast, you have almost half of the calves surviving. And we, you know, there might be multiple things going on there, but we think this is largely predation driven. This is kind of our high predator density area. There's a lot of lions, a lot of wolves. There's probably a black bear for every square mile, and grizzlies. And so you put all these numbers together and you get a graph kind of like this. So based on that adult female survival, and then the calves that were born and actually made it through their first year, you can take that and figure out what your population should be doing, if it's growing or declining. And that's this bold line where the 1 is. If you're below that line, you'd be declining. If you're above that line, you'd be increasing. And what you can see here is that pretty much all of the study areas at this point are above that line, but for different reasons. We have really high adult female survival in the Cabinet Fisher in that orange, but it probably can't grow much because of that calf mortality. Early on in the study, the big hole was bouncing around down in this area. It had all right calf recruitment, but just that adult survival was so poor, it was really pushing it down. And then that's improved, and now it's probably maybe even growing a little bit. And then the Rocky Mountain Front, of course, is just keeps continuing to grow. And this is actually kind of an aside, but it was kind of fun because they just actually did this analysis. So we run around and get these pellets from these moose all winter long to see if they're pregnant. So we submitted those to the Rocky Mountain Research Station to do genetic analysis. They can actually pull the genetic signature of different plant species out of the pellets. And so this is kind of our first look at their different diets in the different areas. And it's just kind of interesting because how different they are. So here in the big hole, this might not surprise you much, but over half their diet is willows in the wintertime. Moose like willows. But what was interesting, what got picked up in here was, you can't really see the names, but here's grasses and rushes and sedges, which, you know, kind of makes sense around here. We don't see it in any other study areas, but a lot of haystack moose in the big hole here, and that's where they're picking up these grasses. I could just maybe mention right here, one of the interesting things about the cabinet fisher is a lot of shiny leaf ceanothus in the winter. And you often do find them in that ceanothus in the wintertime. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about what it may have caused a decline in moose up in that northwest country, because people will tell you, you know, they're just not like they used to be. That ceanothus tends to grow in burns and timber harvested areas. And they've cut a lot less timber up there than they used to in the 70s and 80s. And one of the thoughts is that's growing in, they might be losing some of these food resources. And then I just mentioned the Rocky Mountain Front. Again, a lot of willow. The second one is red osier dogwood, which isn't like super abundant on the landscape, but apparently they can find it because they're eating a lot of it. And you guys have probably seen those plants when moose hit them, and they can really hit them hard. So that's a little bit of an aside, but it does talk about maybe their nutritional status a bit. So as the study kind of winds down, there's quite a bit of analysis to do, and there's going to be new insights coming out of that analysis. We are kind of starting to form up a picture with those original questions. So in terms of what's really driving the population, you know, in each study area, we're seeing something different kind of dominating. In the cabinet fisher, we're seeing calf survival being most important. On the Rocky Mountain Front, you know, that good nutritional status is making them highly fecund. But the big heavy hitter is actually the adult survival. That moved the population more than anything else, and that's what we saw in the big hole. And then we can kind of we're starting to be able to tie at least likely hypotheses of what's moving these different vital rates. Again, predation is probably affecting calf survival, whereas that adult survival is being driven by parasites and disease probably. So I think with that, I'm happy to take more questions, but I'll now turn over to Van. Yes.
So you could almost say conquer encroachment, decrease of deciduous plants on the landscape might equal investments.
In some cases, you know, if it's starting to eat up into willow, aspen, and then some of the other ice cream species, gooseberry, currants, stuff like that. Yeah, we could. They do eat conifers too in the winter, but I don't think it's because they're especially nutritious at all. You know, I think it's just to get by. So.
In your neck of the woods, they eat a lot of mahogany, like up in the Timber Gulch and in the south end of the Highlands, they're mahogany woods, which is not what you would expect.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we don't have, none of these areas are mahogany systems. If we did that analysis in some of these places, it would just be a lot of mahogany, I think.
All right, so I'll give you, I'm going to be mindful of the time here, but I'll give you an update on the sage-grouse study that we've been working on for the past several years. I think this is probably year 5 that we've been working on the sage-grouse study. And, you know, I think the main thing to say about a lot of like the moose study, the sage-grouse, I also am going to talk to you about the pronghorn study that we started. A lot of the impetus for these projects in putting collars on some of these animals is to like basically have these critters tell us what their needs are so that we then can work collaboratively in this watershed, in this landscape, and see if we can't find that common ground to make sure that we maintain ag, unlike fisheye guy, maintain ag on the landscape, and also do what's right for the wildlife as well. And we can't do a lot of that stuff. I can't go to any of you and sit down at your table and say, can we do some conifer encroachment project, or can we do a sagebrush restoration without having the data? And so that's where putting some units, some GPS units on these animals so that they generate the information that we need to then sit down and say,
barbed wire fences kill sage grouse.
Yep. And so that's why we have this data, so that we can then work with landowners to accomplish our common goals. So with that, I do want to first acknowledge that a lot of these projects that we're working on are definitely partnership projects. And this one has been very much the Big Hole Watershed Committee and the landowners who give us access to their property to go capture on the
barbed wire fences kill sage grouse.
Can we mute? Yeah. So along those lines, and hunters too, exactly. So anyway, our mission, it has not changed since the beginning when Jim McGee and I sat down, Kelly Bochting at the BLM and many others. We want to do this collaborative approach to doing sage grouse conservation. In some ways, it's sagebrush conservation, in full recognition that we're on a working landscape and there's a lot of stakeholders. So this is similar to what you've seen me present the past several years, just kind of a summary of what we've gotten so far. Since 2018, we've captured 39 hens and put these little GPS backpack units on, like the one that you see there. There's been some interesting, like anything, the more that technique gets tried, at first it's really great, and then we start finding out, what are the possible detriments of it. And so there's been some concern in the sage grouse conservation arena that these units may actually increase mortality. And I took a critical look at the units that we're using and compare them to the ones in the literature where researchers were finding that maybe it was causing mortality of these birds. And the ones that we use are a lot lighter, and the technology that we use, we don't have all the bells and whistles on there. So that keeps it, we only have one antenna on the units that we use, and it's about 6 inches long, and it lays in line with the tail feathers. Some of the other units have an additional component on there that adds weight, and it adds a second antenna. So, I did take a critical look at what we were doing, because you don't want to love these things to death. We want to learn from these birds, but at the same time, not cause them harm. So anyway, I felt comfortable that what we are using was not necessarily increasing their mortality rates. Of course, you never know that entirely, but to the best of my abilities. Having said that, we have had 25 mortalities over the course of the study with these 39 birds. And most of our mortalities occurred during the nesting period. And that just seems to be a critical time. And, they are sitting ducks, basically. They're sitting grouse on these nests. And our movement data, we could tell, they very seldom will move off that nest. And if they have to go far to feed, or they have to get off, if it's a particularly wet and cold June, and so they're having to leave their nest more often, they're just much more susceptible to predation. And then there is, I haven't looked at the data for this, and it's something that I need to look at, but there is the possibility that when it is a wet June, when they're sitting on their nest, it heightens their odor and makes them more susceptible for being found by coyotes and fox. And if you think about your dog licking his nose, and that increases their scent ability, their sensing ability. So there is some thought out there that, you know, those wet springs when they're sitting on their nest actually makes them more detectable because of the odor to carnivore predators, to canine predators. So, but anyway, so right now we have 6 hens on the air still from the past. Some of those hens have been wearing their GPS units for the past couple of years, but we are starting to see the batteries die on some of those. So the 6 unit failures, some of those are just that, you know, the batteries on these units are not meant to last more than a couple of years. And those birds have been out there long enough for the batteries to die in. So this was not a good year, it seems like, for nest success. We did have 12 nest attempts. One of those birds tried to re-nest after her first nest failed. But of those 12 nest attempts, we had 1 successfully hatched nest. And we also had 3 hen mortalities where they were predated on the nest or during their incubation period. And then we always have a handful of nest depredations. And sometimes those are avian predators and sometimes they are terrestrial predators. So coyote, fox, something get into the nest. So concurrent with that, with this data collection for this spring, I have wing barrels out around the valley. There's 1 set up in Wisdom and 1 set up here, and then 1 at the Sportsman's Campground over by the turnoff to Mill Creek Highway. And the information that we get from those grouse wings, so we ask hunters to turn in 1 wing for each bird that they harvest. And I could age those wings and get a sense of what the juvenile to adult ratios are in the harvest, and then tie that back to what the production was this year. And so I kind of combined that data with the nesting data that I get from the sage grouse in the springtime with these marked birds. It's not looking too good this year. And with it being, so we had a couple of cold, wet days in June, right around the time that these birds were hatching their nest. And so that it's hard for those chicks to survive. They're precocial. So as soon as they hatch, the mom takes them and they leave the nest. They don't stay in that nest. And so then they're exposed to the elements. So when we have those June snowstorms during that time, it's really hard for those chicks to survive. But then we followed that with the drought, and those chicks really need forbs and they need grasshoppers. That's kind of their best food sources to put on their weight and their development in July. And so with the drought and a lot of these wet areas being dried up, some of that food source was not available. So I don't expect to see a lot of chick survival or juvenile recruitment this year. But I do want to mention, so, you know, a lot of this GWIS information that we're getting from the collar data, we're trying to put this right back into the ground with conservation projects. And again, I'm doing these projects with landowners because a lot of the sage grouse in the big hole, they do occur on public land, but a lot of them really occur, make their living year round in some cases on private land. And so we're taking this data, and this Jim McGee has been great through the partners, the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, translating this data into projects, working in collaboration with a lot of landowners. So these are the projects that occurred this year as a result of some of the data. Jim was able to work with the landowner in the upper big hole and do 120 acres of sagebrush conservation. It just worked out really well where a landowner was going to plow under 120 acres to make pasture, but Jim was able to work with him and kind of change around, you know, some of the pasture layout and the grazing plan. And so ended up with retaining that sagebrush and then putting in some fences and ways that just would move the cattle around, and everybody was happy with it in the end. Also towards the gentleman's comment earlier about, you know, fences sometimes causing mortality. Another project that Jim worked on was 11 miles of woven wire fence, getting that removed, and then replace that with 5-strand wire fence that is much more wildlife friendly. And then also working on a mesic restoration area. Mesic areas are those wet meadows where those forbs and grasshoppers, they're good brood rearing areas where the hens will take their chicks. And so there's an area that Jim is working with the landowner to just restore this whole meadow complex, wet meadow complex, and restore the spring that has had some trampling action and whatnot. And again, working with the landowner to put in some pasture fencing so that the cattle can make better use of the water source there, and lead to just this habitat restoration in this wet area. So, and then the conifer removal, which is just ubiquitous now. There's a lot of projects out there to get conifer encroachment out of sagebrush and aspen areas.
We're working with you on that stage. Working on getting
yes.
something secure for that one. We may have shown it before in the past where it's like a wet fin that drops like 8 feet into a hole, that whole head cut. We're risking losing all of that wetland.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that and bringing that up. So, so much of what we're doing, it's just partnership. I mean, I can't stress that enough, and you guys all know that. I mean, it's just been the strength of constituents coming together, working together. What are the common goals, and let's go with it. So, any questions on sage grouse before I move into pronghorn? Yes.
Just in southeastern Idaho, the Dubois Kilgore area, grouse, all species of grouse, including the sage grouse, got tremendous 6-7 chicks
this year.
Yeah, but it had to do with, I'm sure, it was too cold. We didn't have a cold wet June.
Yeah. Yeah.
More than seen for years.
Yeah.
I don't know how to keep track of them.
Right. Yeah.
What's the minimum continuous area you think your population can survive?
Well, it's interesting.
300 acres, sagebrush.
No, like at this point, I wouldn't recommend any grouse restoration, you know, in the big hole. But from some of these hens, like some of them do make their whole living year round. They're nesting, they're brood rearing, they're wintering on one landowner. I mean, within a 300-acre area. And some of them move a little bit further. And that's what we're looking at too, is, you know, their migration and their movement patterns, their seasonal movement patterns. And we've only had one that has left the big hole and went to the horse prairie area to winter. And unfortunately, that one met with mortality 2 years into it. So we lost her, but we haven't seen any others have that similar pattern. We did capture some at the upper end of the valley this year. And so that kind of expanded out our knowledge of what they're doing at that upper end of the valley. And one of the birds in particular is kind of pushing up against the big hole divide, but she stayed in the valley the whole time so far. So, but that's some of what we're looking at too, is just where they're making their living and what can we do? Is there something that we need to do, first of all, to improve the habitat conditions? And if not, fine. And if there is, we're trying to work with folks on that. So, yeah. But as far as, you know, do we need to pump up this population? I would say no. I think You know, one of the other things we're looking at is genetically how the big hole population is connected genetically to other populations in Southwest Montana and in the Idaho population. So we actually have somebody contracted for us right now who's doing that genetic work and looking at the movement data from our birds and comparing it to other populations. So I would say the big hole population is it's a steady satellite population, and its importance is in the genetic diversity that it provides to these other, you know, to these other populations across the Southwest and into Idaho. So, and there probably is mixing that occurs with the Idaho birds, because some of the birds that Idaho had marked, they end up nesting in Montana. And so there's invariably some mixing that's going on there. So, any other questions about sage-grouse? All right, so the next one I want to tell you about is this pronghorn study. So if you think about it in the big hole, we basically, you know, we've been started. So we started with the grayling, and then we moved into the riparian with the moose, and then we moved up a little bit onto the sagebrush benches with the sage-grouse, and now we're looking at the antelope. And so a couple of years ago, there were several biologists from across the state who we all kind of arrived at the same point at the same time of, we have these pronghorn populations and we'd like to know more about them. We'd like to better understand their migrations, their seasonal ranges, and where do we need to look to do better to improve habitat conditions on their ranges, improve corridors that they're migrating to. And so I had put the big hole population on the radar for that study because I know we have this population that winters in Horse Prairie and they migrate into the valley, a portion of them do, and then another subset of them go all the way up onto the Mount Hagen Game Range. And that's about a 90-mile migration. There's a lot between where they start and where they end up. And so what's going on in between there, and are there some needs, conservation needs? And because the big hole community is already conservation minded and we're already primed to work together on things, it seemed like the next place to go. So the Montana pronghorn movement and population study, the objective of this study across the whole state is to monitor the location data, identify potential conservation concerns within their ranges and along their movement corridors. And so we are 2 years into it. We've been putting GPS collars on does on their winter range in Horse Prairie. So we've had 77 collars that we've put out in the Horse Prairie last winter and this winter combined. Of those, we've had 18 mortalities. 3 of the collars have malfunctioned. And so we still have 56 collared does on the air. That map shows you the movement data from all the collars collectively since we first hung them in January of 2020, I guess it was. So, you know, here's your Horse Prairie area, here's the winter range, and you can see their movement patterns. Maybe that might be better. Yeah. Where is that little red button? Okay. So here's where we collared them, and this is their primary winter range. And so the first winter we just focused on capturing and collaring here. Last winter we captured some over in the Argenta and the Frying Pan area, so that gave us a lot more data that you see here. But basically, I like to call this the bus route or the bus stop theory, because we have them all here in the winter time. And then come spring, they start this route, and some of them take off and they go up into the grasshopper. And then some come around the hill and they're over in Dumpcott and Flats and Hairpin. And then the rest continue on past Jackson. Some stay around Fox Gulch. And then we come up here, there's a lot over on the Battlefield area. This is over Music Broad, Doolittle Country, Pintler, and then they just, there's a bunch that kind of go back and forth through this country, and then there's a handful that end up on Mount Hagen. So it's a lot of country that they travel through, and the other thing I wanted to mention is we have a handful that go up Bloody Dick Creek here, and one of them even took the oddball route to the hairpin by going through the timber at the top of the divide and going that way, where the rest of them go all the way around the hill. You can see Carroll Hill is a huge bottleneck. That is a place where they're all funneling through just about. So, I mean, just right off the bat, these are things that draw our eye. What's going on here? What are the fences there? Are there ways that we could make that a little bit more permeable? Just looking at that, and then looking at the habitat on their summer ranges and on their fawning areas. And, ironically, when I fly summer surveys, I find them less in the sagebrush than I do in open areas. And they are, I find them a lot near these music meadows, these wet areas. And I guess that makes sense when, after a while, I'll fly in July, and so things typically are a little bit drier than anyway. And so they definitely do kind of zero in on where those wet areas are, those wet meadows. And they might be in the sagebrush, near them, but they're definitely associated with those wet areas. So those are the things that we key in on as, okay, those are areas we need to look, and can we do improvements in those wet areas? And can we make sure that the fences are permeable along the route? So here's an example of how we're using the data. These two maps are from two different collared does, and these locations, these lines are all the locations of those animals on the winter range. And you can see that there's a bit of a, pretty solid circle in both of these areas. When we went out and investigated what that circle may have been, this is what we found. We found a sheep wire fence with a bottom wire, barbed wire right at the ground, and then two more strands of barbed wire on top. That height is probably about 50 to 60 inches. And so pretty impermeable, but somehow, sometimes the antelope would get in there, and then they would just kind of run around in circles till they found a pathway out of that. So those are the types of projects where we're sitting down with the landowners and saying, hey, can we do something here that meets your needs for fences, but also provides maybe a little bit better passage for the animals. And so once again, it was a partnership. Oh, and here's a picture of one of those fences. The BLM biologist put a camera on it this winter, and you can see the big scar and scabbing on the doe's back from going underneath these fences. And in fact, a lot of the does, when we captured them, they had, racing stripes down their back from just having to crawl under low barbed wire often enough that it, removed the hair on their back. So those are the types of things that we're trying to work on with the landowners there. Yeah, so antelope, that's interesting. They can, but they don't. Behaviorally, they very rarely will jump a fence. They are more designed to go underneath fences. So our recommendation is 18 inches bottom wire and make it smooth so that the antelope could go underneath it, as well as young calves and deer. So, but how we've been using this data is, once again, partnership. And I've listed off the folks at the bottom who we've been partnering with in this one. And there's probably a lot more entities that I did not list there. But we basically hired a fence coordinator. So if you're familiar with Sean Flaffy and his role as the sagebrush coordinator, we did the same thing. We have the Wildlife Federation housing that position. We have the fencing coordinator who is just increasing the capacity for all of us with the different agencies to get these projects done and to work together. And so that movement data from the pronghorn showed us about 30 or 40 miles of fencing that ideally we would like to make a little bit more permeable. And so we've been able to get some grant money for the next 3 years, and we're on target to get 30 miles of fencing, 25 miles of fencing done over the next 3 years. And Simon Buzard is the fencing coordinator, and he stepped into that role the beginning of this summer and has just been doing a great job. He has just finished up doing 10 miles of fencing. And this picture I'd like to point out. So we worked with this group called 2% for Conservation. And similar to what Pedro set up with the 1% for the Big Hole Watershed, this is an affiliation of for-profit businesses that are conservation minded. And so they have pledged to give back 1% of their proceeds and 1% of their employees' time annually towards conservation projects. And so we were able to partner up with a lot of their affiliates, including this crew. They work for a tile company in Michigan, and they are members of 2% for Conservation. And they said, yep, we'll come out, we'll bring heavy equipment, and we'll rip out page wire fence. And so, and they're just a bunch of hunting guys too. I think they probably, most of them have come out to Montana. So they drove all this like heavy equipment out here. And I don't know if they spent 5 days, how long, but they pulled up over 2 miles of page wire fencing, rolled it up and hauled it out of Horse Prairie area. And then behind that, we were able to get a contract in there to put in a wildlife friendly fence. So it's been a great, so far it's been a really great, successful project, and we're just going to keep rolling through. The landowners in Horse Prairie have been awesome to work with, and just a lot of good things are coming out of that data. So I'll just quickly, so one thing I did this summer, just out of curiosity, as much as just a biologist in me, I took the migration route of one of these pollard does that goes up to Mount Hagen, and I started at Horse Prairie and backpacked, got as far as Wisdom, and then hopefully I'll get the rest of it done here in the next couple of weeks. But I wanted to experience and see what those antelope were actually encountering along the way. And so my hiking partner, some of you may recognize Emma Kerr. So she came back out here. I was able to convince her to come back out to the Big Hole and hike with me. And so, yeah, so we did 55 miles along through here. And I think we pretty close to 50 fences we crossed. So it's just about a fence every mile. And some of them are fine. And, you know, the antelope don't seem to have any problem going through them or underneath them. And then some we marked for going back in and talking to landowners to see. And mainly it's raising up that bottom wire. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. That was, and the landowners were really awesome to give us permission. I think I ended up having to get permission from 20 different landowners. People were great. I threw this up here just as one final slide, just to show you. On the left is data from our marked sage grouse, and then on the right is data from the marked pronghorn, and I tried to put them to scale. But you can see there's a commonality of the habitat that the sage grouse make use of and that the pronghorn make use of. And so it just heightens that conservation need, you know, just gives strength to, okay, the animals are telling us what they need, where they need it. We just need to pay attention and then sit down with landowners and work collaboratively on some of these projects. So.
And I wonder if you would, if you got closer in, if you wouldn't find music areas and sort of wet meadows as the sort of focal point of all of these concentrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's some of the analysis that's being done with our sage grouse data right now. And then we'll also eventually do that with pronghorn stuff. But yeah.
Those are also areas where there's sage.
the west side of the building.
Yeah, there is that for sure, Dean. And, you know, so it does kind of illustrate where the sage is. But even with that, like on that, the east side of the valley here, like there's a lot of sagebrush, but they just seem to zero in on certain areas. And so, yeah. So,
how far will they go for water or feed away from the water source?
The pronghorn?
Yeah.
You know, it's a good question. I mean, like this year, so I think this year, especially with it being so dry, their water sources are less. So, and I say that because, you know, June and July, a lot of their water source is just the vegetation, you know, if the vegetation is moist. And so, you know, it's not like they're seeking out open water. But in a year like this, this is what I would call, like what we call a closed winter, when they don't have a lot of options of where to be. This is a closed summer. They just don't have a lot of options. So I don't think they can go too far away. I don't have a direct answer to that, but I don't think they're going to be that far away. You know, every day they're needing to get water somewhere. So, yeah. Any other questions on the pronghorn project? Or? And Tana keeps telling me it's time to, as her head nods and hits the button. Yeah. I don't, let me, you know, see where you guys are at. It's 20 after 9. You want to, I mean, Jesse and I have another bunch of stuff, but we can stop here too. It's late. And I know some of you have drives. Won't hurt our feelings. A lot. Yeah. Yeah. We can, this is probably the most important stuff.
The other stuff
is our harvest data, hunting data. Yeah.
Does anyone have a specific hunting district or anything that they were interested in seeing? We could just jump straight to that. 3.
You could. I was just going to say before Ben jumps in there, we could also, you have our numbers, you could call us individually. And maybe that's the best way to handle it. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Yeah. And you're welcome to put the whole slideshow up as a link. So
just like maybe a bigger picture question to the level of comfort that you have in talking about it. What's going on with just wildlife management in general at the agency? The big changes that you're seeing, things that you're comfortable saying that you're seeing directions that are competitive that are maybe different from the past.
Yeah, so as we move into, this is our biennial season setting, which every 2 years, you know, we come out in the fall with some proposals, some ideas about any potential changes. We go through a season setting process, open public comment period, get feedback. This year, things are a little bit different. We have actually been tasked by the director of FWP several tasks. We need to look at ways to reduce the number of hunting districts, simplify, reduce the number of licenses and permit types, try to make more simple our season start and end dates, so get rid of split seasons, things like that. Move away from permits, antlerless elk permits like what we have in the Highlands. What am I missing, Jesse? That's kind of the main things. Portions of districts, you know, like 329, that portion that's in the big hole, that sort of stuff. So the whole intent behind this is for recruiting, retaining, and reactivating hunters, making sure that we have a strong hunting public in Montana. And one of the things that we've heard over the years is our regs are way too complicated, and that turns people away. So the director said, let's deal with that. I want you all to take a critical look at your hunting districts, start with deer and elk, and see where you can't meet some of these goals that we're after. So that's basically what you're going to see coming out from us. like for instance, I'm looking at putting 319, 341 back together into one unit, putting 334, 321 back together as one unit. And I guess the other overarching directive we were given was just focus on the biology, not the advocacy, not the social fabric. Let groups and individuals advocate for themselves for the social aspect of wildlife management, which is a little bit different, a little bit odd feeling for us because that's always been a big part of how we approach this. But we are just going on the biology. And so where we have populations, you know, common population or similar management needs, you know, you might see us drawing a boundary, drawing a district around that way. So, so we are soon to come out publicly with what are our proposals to this point. They will be on our website. We'll be making them publicly available here shortly. And then there's going to be 2 public comment periods. There'll be one, Jesse, help me out with this. Is it mid-October to mid-November? And then another one mid-December to, yeah. So, and we're going to have an open house. It looks like we're having just one in Region 3 in Bozeman, which I know is difficult for everybody on this end. We were trying to figure out a common date to hold another one in Butte, but we will have one in Bozeman on October 4th, and that'll be to set the stage for this first public comment period, October 15th, November 15th. And then it will go to the commission for preliminary approval, and then we will come back out December 15th through January 15th for the next and final public comment. And that's when we'll also have our more localized meetings. And so there'll be one in Butte, one in Dillon, one in Whitehall, one in Bozeman, blah, blah, blah. I think I just saw a mouse in the kitchen, but yeah, it was on top of that birthday cake. Yeah.
Brian Wheeler on Zoom.
Okay.
Hey, Van,
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Just a quick question with regard to the hunting in particular for the birds. You had mentioned putting out those barrels, and I see those all the time driving around the backcountry, the wing barrels. And just out of curiosity, you know, I know a lot of bird hunters in this area, given kind of the lighter populations of birds and sort of just the limited nature of where sage grouse live, they're pretty cagey about where they hunt. I know I am. And so I was curious, like, a lot of guys I talk to, they don't want to put their wings in those barrels because they don't want somebody to park there, take a peek in and say, oh, there's birds here, I'm going to go hunt. But I know it really helps you. Is that something that can be given to you or another biologist directly?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I could say is we don't have a barrel at every field or every,
sure.
And so like, I have no idea where those wings are coming from, and neither would anybody else looking in there, at least of the collection barrels that I have. You know, I mean, one's sitting on the front porch of the Hook and Horn and Wisdom. So, right. You know, and then another one's at the in front of the Blue Moon Saloon here in Divide. So
you're not necessarily studying the wings from that particular barrel, assuming that they came from that spot.
No,
okay.
No, we are. So Jesse Newby out of Dillon and Dean Waltzy out of Sheridan and I all have wing barrels, and we just pool all of our data at the end.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not getting at individual honey holes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
thank
if
you.
you could pass that along to those folks, that would.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Bedtime?
What's going on the 14th in Wisdom that will vary?
Thank you. Yes. Let me just throw a slide up so you could. Okay. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has been in the Big Hole, Pioneers, Pintlers this summer, putting up a whole bunch of hair snare, camera traps to try to get at some of the questions we've had about these grizzly bears in the Big Hole. And so Jennifer Fort Nurius is the gal from Fish and Wildlife Service who's in charge of that program. And she is going to be giving a update in October, Thursday, October 14th, 7 p.m. at the Masonic Temple in Wisdom, to let you guys know. She won't have all the DNA results back, but she will have an idea of where they had hits from what stations throughout. And so they were trying to put stations, these hair snare stations, close to where there had been confirmed sightings over the past 5 or 6 years. And so anyway, that in combination with the bear that Chet just saw on camera recently, you know, she'll have some good information. I know that there's been some grizzlies caught on some of the cameras out there. So, and I want to acknowledge her willingness and her receptivity, like from the very start when we asked her to come into the big hole and do this study to try to figure out how many bears, gender of bears, and their the origin of them. Are they from the NCDE, from the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, or are they from Yellowstone ecosystem? Right from the start, we said, please just be very transparent with this study, with the information, with the findings. And so, you know, she approached me and said, okay, we're ready to reveal some of what we found. And so can you set up a meeting in Wisdom? So anyway, thank you, Howard, for prompting me on that. Anything else? Okay, thank you guys. Yep.
Everybody, thanks for coming, thanks for sticking around. Next month will be really interesting talk. Jim Dennehy is going to give us the lowdown on how Butte uses water from the big hole and what happened with their water use this year and this drought year and what their plans are. There's obviously huge implications for the big hole from Butte. So make sure you are here. Same time, same station. Are we in daylight savings by next meeting? Not till November. Not till November. Okay.
And I'd just like to say this is Chris from Untitled Chapter.
Oh, hi Chris.
Sorry for rolling in late.
No worries. Thanks for joining. I was going to come introduce myself afterwards, but yeah. Thanks for coming. All right.